Skolovy here, PokerListings.com strategy writer. Today we're going to have a look at value betting. Basically the idea is when you make a bet, you either want to make a better hand fold, which is a bluff, or you want to make a worse hand call. Value betting is extremely important when you're playing poker. It is how you get paid. If you have a better hand than your opponent, obviously you want to get value from that. Today we're going to have a look at a few hands that I've played in the last week or so where I think I make pretty decent value bets and get some good value out of my hands. First hand, Queen 5 suited in the big blind, get it under the gun limp, small blind limp, and I check my option obviously. Board comes 5-5-6, good flop for me, I make triples, pretty good kicker. There's not too many hands that beat me at this point. Weedy checks, I bet 2/3 pot for value, Jack calls and Weedy calls. They could be calling here with a 6, a smaller 5, a pocket pair like 4s, 3s, flush draw, straight draw, lots of hands here yet. Turn comes 8 of diamonds, Weedy checks, I bet 2/3 pot again for value. Jack of calls and Weedy calls. At this point they probably have a hand. There's a chance they have a flush draw or a straight draw, but it's pretty low at this point. Their most likely hand is a 5, a smaller 6, smaller 5, a 6, an 8, or a pocket pair. River comes 10 of clubs, doesn't change anything. Weedy checks again, I bet 20, Jack of folds, and Weedy makes the call. Weedy has smaller triples. Pretty interesting hand, well, pretty standard hand. I have a good 3 of a kind hand. There's not too many hands out there that can beat me, and there's lots of hands out there that my opponent can have that are worse than mine, that he's willing to call a bet with. Unfortunately it's a 5, but I think he might call with a good 8, a good 6, or like a pocket pair like 7s or something. Okay, next hand we get aces, get a fold under the gun, I make it $4, button folds, small blind calls, and big blind folds. Flop comes Queen 9-6, small blind checks, and I bet out a little over 2/3 pot. It's a good standard continuation bet spot. I'm going to be betting this flop with Ace King. I'm going to be betting pretty much anything I raise pre-flop with. So he calls, and at this point his range is still very wide. He could have a 9, a 6, a queen, straight draw, Jack 10, 10-8 for the double gut shot. His hand's very wide now. You cannot define what he has just by one call alone. Turn comes 3 of clubs, he checks, I bet again, and he calls again. I bet for the same reasons. My hand is very strong compared to the board and compared to my opponent's likely holdings. He calls again, which at this point it probably discounts the draws a little bit, but we don't have too much history, so he could be calling with straight draws still. I think at this point he probably has a queen, he probably has a good 9, or he probably has some sort of pocket pair, maybe jacks or 10s. Not quite sure yet. Probably a queen though, I would think. River comes down Jack, he checks, and at this point a lot of people will check through thinking, well, I got called in 2 spots, he probably has a set, he probably has 2 pair. He could have a set, he could have 2 pair, but a set is very unlikely. You probably would have heard from it at this point. The only 2 pair hand that really makes sense at this point would be Queen Jack that he just rivered. That makes up a pretty small part of his range. I think he could have other queens, King Queen, Ace Queen, Queen 10. Could still have stubborn Ace 9 might call you down. Could have Jack 10 and hit the Jack and be looking to see a showdown. There's a lot of hands that'll call you here that are worse than your pocket aces. His range is mostly weak, well not weak, but 1 pair hands. And we have the best 1 pair hands, so we're going to put a bet in for value. I go almost $30 into 53, and he makes the call, and he has Jack 10 offsuit. So he had the open ender, and he rivered his Jack and wanted to see a showdown. I think that river is a pretty clear bet. There's a lot of worse hands that can call you. If you don't bet that river, I think you're leaving a lot of value on the table. Okay, last hand I have Jack 10 offsuit on the button. I get a limper and a cutoff, and I raise to punish the limper. Get a fold, and I get 2 callers. Board comes 10 high, giving me top pair. And the small blind bets, so really weak, is a weak lead, $3 into 13. These bets are usually weak. I'm gonna be raising them with a lot of my range here. Pretty much anything I continuation bet here with, I'm probably gonna raise his weak lead like that. Pablito calls, and since I have Jack 10, which is top pair, way ahead of my regular continuation betting, I'm gonna raise. I raised it to 10. I probably should have raised it a little bit more in retrospect, but Cardossi calls and Pablito folds. Heads up to the turn, and it's the king of clubs. He checks, and at this point I decide to check behind. The reason I check behind is I have Jack 10, it's top pair. That's an okay kicker, but if I bet all 3 streets with Jack 10, I'm rarely going to be called with less. So there's not much value in value betting 3 streets, because if you value bet 3 streets and you get called, your hand's never going to be good. So I take the turn out of the equation here and I check behind. The river brings me a pretty good card at Jack, meaning I beat Queen 10 now, I beat Ace 10, I beat any 10 except for King 10, and he checks, which makes King 10 very unlikely. After I check through on the turn, he's likely not going to try and check raise me with King 10, because he'll miss out on value if I check through. So if he has King 10 at this point, he would likely bet out, but he doesn't. He checks. So his most likely holding is a 10. He donk bet into me on the flop, I raised him, and he called. There's not very many draws out there, so he likely has a 10. So I fire out $20 into 36, trying to get value out of a worse 10, and he makes the call. He has 10-9 for the worst 10. Our read was right, and we got solid value out of our good hand. I think it shows you that it's very important to make good quality value bets on the river. Try and attempt to put your opponent on a range, and if your hand is better than his range, then you have to put in a bet on the river. It'll get you paid off, and ultimately your win rate will thank you.